Odell. Terry was born in Los Angeles and now makes her home in Divide, Colorado. An avid reader, her parents tell everyone they had to move from their first home because she had finished the local library. She always wanted to fix stories, so the characters did what she wanted in books, television, and in the movies. Once she began writing, she found this wasn't always possible, as evidenced when the mystery she intended to write rapidly became a romance. I first met Terry in a critique group when she was writing Where Danger Hides, her second Blackthorn novel. Thanks for joining me today, Terry.
Glad to be here.
Your Blackthorns are my favorite of your novels, combining the thrill of action and adventure with an underpinning romance. For those who haven't read Terry's books, in addition to the Blackthorn novels, she's written the Mapleton Mysteries with Police Chief Gordon Hepler, the Pine Hills novels, which are police-based mysteries with romance, and the Triple D Ranch romantic suspense novels, among other projects. So I want to start out by talking about the Blackthorn series, which is my personal favorite, and your longest running series.
Yeah.
Did you have a vision starting out the series, or did you stumble into it one book at a time?
Back then, I had actually started with my first Pine Hills book, Finding Sarah, and was trying to sell it back in the days when it was all traditional and find an agent and everything else. So I started something totally different, figuring if you can't sell one, you got to do something else. So the Blackthorns were actually the second series that I started. And I really don't know what hit me. I was probably just looking, I always start with a character. And I said, well, what would happen if? And I put them in a situation. And it turned into those covert ops things, because if I make stuff up, I don't have to worry that they need a helicopter, but the Coast Guard doesn't have helicopters, or the Navy doesn't have that kind of a thing, or they don't have this equipment. So I created Blackthorn with its bottomless pit of money so that they could put whatever they needed, whatever I needed for the story, wherever it needed to be. And it just got to be fun.
Okay, so the covert ops was basically just so that you could give them the toys that they needed to play with?
Pretty much. I mean, if you go real, and that's something that I've learned very, very early on, if you make it real, then it's got to be right. So if you make it almost real, then it can be almost right.
Yeah, I know that we went to a Writers Police Academy together,
Yes.
and they taught us that as long as you can make it believable, you can stretch the tenets of belief.
Exactly. As a matter of fact, we used to have breakfast at this little cafe not too far from here, and there was a guy there who referred to himself as a former spook, and he worked in the library. So he found out I wrote books, and he got my books. So we would talk about them. And I asked him some questions once, and he said, don't worry about it. If it doesn't exist now, it will 6 months from now. So by the time your book comes out, whatever you've made up will probably be reality.
So what excites you in this series, the thing that keeps you writing the next book?
The characters. It's always the characters. When you have a group of a team of covert operatives or whatever, you'll focus on one in this book, and then you go, well, Dalton really wants his turn, and then there's another one that comes up. So you've got a cast of characters, and it pretty much revolves about focusing on one, then another, and then another. So I'm actually almost ready to publish the 10th in the series, and I started actually what I call in my head new blood at Blackthorn, because the guys that I had, most of those had already met their happily ever afters, and they were getting old or older. Takes, some youth to handle the kind of action I make them go through. And so I brought in a whole new crew, and the old guys are still in the back, but they're kind of in administrative and consulting positions. So it's going on. It could go on for another 3 books.
Well, as long as you keep finding characters that can go out on the apps, I guess that's what counts, right?
Yeah, exactly. And you ding one up, so you got to bring in a new one to take his place. Or one came in and he was very helpful to Rambler in the 9th book, and so it was his turn to come in. And that's basically what I do. I look at whose turn is it, what are they going to do, what kind of an op can I send them on, and then they need a foil, they need, or a heroine or a hero. There are a couple of women operatives, and they've had Olivia's had her turn. So I don't know. As I tell anybody who asks, why do you write? What keeps you motivated? And it sure as heck beats cleaning toilets.
So, okay, well, let's move on to your Mapleton books. What prompted you to write those? I know those are more mystery-based, and they center around Gordon Hepler.
Right. Well, back in the day, I thought I was writing a mystery because that's all I read. And that first book that turned into a romance, my daughters read chapters and they said, "Mom, it's a romance." And I go, "Well, it can't be because I've never read a romance. If I haven't read one, how can I write one? I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing." But I discovered romantic suspense and thought, well, that would work. So finally, I think it was about my 6th book where I started the Mapleton series. And at the time, I was going to the post office because you had to mail stuff. And I was going in there for a job I had, and then also mailing manuscripts. You'd get an agent who'd say, "Send me 3 chapters," and you'd go in. So everybody at the post office got to know me, and I got to know everybody there. And I had a short story published by Wild Rose Press, and one of the clerks said, "Oh, I read your story. I'll never look at you the same way again." Because that was a romance. And I said, well, I really wanted to write, a mystery. And one of the clerks has said, "I want to be in your book. I want to be, but not the bad guy. I want to be a good guy." And I was toying with the idea of a small town chief of police, kind of like the Jesse Stone novels. And I said, well, would you like to be a police chief? He said, "Oh, yeah, that would be great." And his name was Gordon Hepler. And I said, "Sure, I'll name my character after you," figuring he was going to sell millions of my books, telling all of his friends. I think he's got a really small family. But we're still in touch. And I have online met a couple of his family. But that's where those started. I wanted to write a mystery, and it was a small town, and so Gordon came into being just because this guy said, use my name and spell it right. Because it's Hepler, it's not Helper. Right. And that tends to be an ongoing thing in a lot of the books where somebody gets Gordon's name wrong and he corrects them.
Yeah, Gordon is what I'd consider a reluctant hero, and I know you've given him his share of challenges. What draws you back to Mapleton? It's
small town Colorado. I can base it off of where I live, although I wasn't living here when I started writing that series. We were thinking about moving, retiring, but I just like the idea of a small town, again, because you can do what you need to do. I did have one reader come up to me and tell me that the only thing wrong was that there were no towns at 6,000 feet on that side of the mountains, on that side of Denver. And I just looked her right in the eye and said, "Yes, there is. It's called Mapleton." And she backed off. You get to make stuff up.
Yep. Yep. I guess you've talked about the Cabot Cove syndrome, where you've got a small town, and the problem with mysteries in a small town is that how many bad things can happen in one place. Now, you seem to have gotten around that pretty deftly. I mean, I haven't felt like everybody's dying in Mapleton.
I do worry about that, and I do think about it, and I consider it. So the first book, they had the first homicide in the town's collective memory. So this was a challenge for the brand new police chief who didn't want to be the chief of police. Mm-hmm. Then in the next one, it was a dog found a bone that was human. So we had a cold case. And then he had health issues, and he was ordered to get away. And so he went off to a B&B in the middle of the winter and discovered a crime there. So it technically wasn't in Mapleton, but he did what he could to help solve it. Then let's see, I brought
And you brought in the movie crew.
Right, I brought in the movie crew and I killed off one of their crew. So really, we haven't had a whole lot of Mapleton people die.
Right, right.
And the last one that I did, Deadly Fun, I guess it was the next to the last one. I've done one since then. Deadly Fun did put Gordon in harm's way again. So with Deadly Options, I just made it much, much more of a cozy mystery. There were still people dying, but they were on the outskirts of what he had to do. And it was more of his relationship with his wife. They're newlyweds and looking for a house. And I just gave them regular domestic issues because that's what I like too. I don't want a book where you spend your whole time with the character solving the crime or fighting the bad guy. I want to know what his life is like. Mm-hmm. And so my secondary tagline or whatever is mysteries with relationships.
Okay.
I'm much happier being able to follow them along. And that's another reason I like the mystery series, because in a mystery series, you've got books and books to resolve relationships. And you don't have to. Man, if I wanted to divorce Angie or kill her off, I could do it in a mystery series. Whereas in a romance, you've got to bring that hero and heroine together by the end of the book. Mm-hmm. And that can be really hard because, let's face it, these books play out over days, maybe a week. They just don't take very long. It's kind of hard to justify a happily ever after with somebody who has met someone 3 days before and they've been running away from bad guys the whole time.
Yeah. So I know you're working on a Triple D Ranch book again. What sparked you to write that series?
I only had 3. I needed a 4th, and Frank hadn't had his turn yet. I put 4 cowboys into the ranch crew, and at the time I thought, well, 3 is the magic number. You got to have 3 books in a series. You got to have at least 3 books. And, I thought, well, Frank didn't have his turn, and I hadn't written a Triple D in a long time. So why not? I didn't want to clean toilets.
Well, that's also set in Colorado, and I know that you went onto a dude ranch to experience life on a ranch. You want to tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. I was looking to see what I could do because, I got my Girl Scout merit badge on horsemanship or whatever they called it back when I was 12. I'm not doing the math, but that was a lot of years ago. And I needed authenticity. As much as I could, being on a ranch was a lot easier than me doing covert ops or investigating a homicide, although I did do ride-alongs with the police. But I was just online looking for where could I go horseback riding? Where could I talk to somebody? Where could I do some research? And there's this one company that said Colorado Cattle Company, where our guests are the cowboys. So I looked into that. That sounded kind of interesting. And basically, you sign up, you go out there for a week, they give you a horse, and you go out and they say, okay, today we're going to take the cattle from that pasture and we're going to move them onto that one. And you learn how to do it all. And you're out there in the saddle almost all day. I think it was the second day or whatever, we're out riding and our 2 guides, our wranglers, said, you see those cows over there? Yeah. Okay, take them over to the fence line and drive them back to the barn. And they stood back, they joked and said, we're going to be here drinking beer, but they didn't, they brought up the rear, but they didn't do much. It was like, okay, here's 5, 6 people who really didn't know all that much about herding cattle, having to drive these cows back to the barn. But quite honestly, I think with a new crew coming in every week, the cows get kind of used to being moved around. But you got to see the little baby ones, and you got to see them being branded, and you got to see them being castrated. And, if you wanted to do anything, so I want to learn how to rope, or I don't want to learn how to rope. I want to learn how to do this, or I don't want to. I want to shoot. I don't want to shoot. It was great. So we went back. I did it two years running.
Okay, so that then you had firsthand experience, so you could write those books from firsthand experience.
Exactly. And if the IRS is listening, tell them not to. Write it off. I mean, I took a trip to the British Isles and wrote Heather's Chase, and I wrote off that trip. So that's another good motivation to write. You don't have to clean toilets and you get to travel.
So, you keep saying it's a way to avoid cleaning toilets, but what is it that keeps you writing? It gives you that spark of excitement that says, I can write a book about that.
I actually don't start off and say, oh, I'm all excited, I'm going to write a book about this. I go, okay, I don't want to clean the toilet, so let's start writing. And then I get excited because it's like, okay, I got this character now. Who am I going to pair him up with? And what does he want? And how can I keep him? It's the sort of evil streak that we all have in us. How can I keep him from doing what he wants? What can I throw at him today?
Yeah, what kind of trouble can he get into? Yeah.
Well, there's, the romance rule is put your heroine up a tree and shoot at her. It's only trouble is interesting. Bad stuff's got to happen. And at the end, it's going to work out all right. But that's just the expectation of the genres. Yeah. If the detective doesn't solve the crime, you're not going to sell another book.
Yeah. Oh, I know. I get excited when I stumble on a plot point unintentionally, something that fits the story perfectly that I wasn't expecting. That's the oh yeah moment that spurs me on.
Right. I mean, I was looking all of my Blackthorn books up to that point, and most of them still do, sort of, not so much with the New Blood, but they started with what my daughter called my MacGyver Gambit, where I threw my covert ops into this ops that they had to deal with, and bad stuff was going to happen. And part of the reason for that was if I injured them, or if they got into trouble, or if they did something that the boss called them into the office, and then he put them on security detail or protection detail, and I didn't have to worry about what kind of guns they were going to use because he was doing something he didn't want to do. He had to go find this daughter of some rich guy who was off in somewhere, who knows what. So I was looking for a place. I said, okay, cartels are big, drugs are big, somewhere in Mexico. And I said, where in Mexico would be a good place for cartels to be doing their drug stuff? And as I'm Googling, it was like, whoa, there's this article that said that, well, first of all, you find out that you could throw a dart at Mexico and there'd be a cartel there. It didn't matter. But drug lords were kidnapping American engineers to build cell phone networks for them so that they could communicate privately off of the basic bandwidth or however people listen into other people's cell phone conversations. I have a consultant that I use whenever I have anything dealing with a cell phone, so I get it right. It was like, oh, my main story was supposed to be taking place in some small town in the middle of nowhere, America, where one of my guys was visiting family or on vacation, and he saw this big, major international bad guy, and nobody would believe this bad guy was there. And that was going to be my story. And all of a sudden it was, well, no, Jinx is in Intel, and he's got the skills, and he can go down there. Somebody's kidnapped somebody, and he's going to go find them. So that whole story took place in Mexico, dealing with this cartel, and he ran into a woman down there with a secondary plot, which always has to happen. So that was a total surprise, and that was like kind of cool fun.
Mm-hmm. So story stripped right out of the headlines.
It was. Of course, it would be a 10-year-old headline if it had made it to Google. But it was realistic enough that I could do it. And as you know, one of our critique partners is a computer guru programmer and knows everything. So he was great keeping me in line as I was making all this stuff up. And he said, that couldn't happen, but that could. So
Yeah.
anyway, I think it's just all discovery. It's what can I do? Where am I going to go today? Because I don't plot, so I don't have anything that to me would make the story boring because I know everything that's going to happen.
Mm-hmm.
So it's sitting down and saying, okay, characters just are looking for somebody, and they're in this craft fair in the town market every week, farmers market and crafts. And well, what if they found this, or what if they found that, or if they overhear a conversation and all of a sudden they're going somewhere else. So that's what's fun.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what they call pantsing, flying by the seat of your pants. And I know I write a lot like that too, and it keeps the story fresh for you, and it makes you more excited about it sometimes because you don't know what's going to happen next. And if you go into all those what ifs and I could do this, or I could do that, and you go off into all these different branches.
Right. I remember writing a short story that I had to do for Wild Rose Press, and I was still living in Florida, and we were meeting live with our critique group, and I had everything done, and I just needed to work out the ending. How do we do this? So we sat there and we brainstormed, and well, what if this happened, and what if that happened, and no, that can't work out, but they don't want this to happen, so it has to happen, and all of this stuff going on. And I got home and I knew exactly what was going to happen. And boy, that was the hardest ending of a story to write. Because then it was all a matter of finding the right words. There was no fun of what's going to happen. Mm-hmm. It was, what's the best way I can put a sentence together that will say that?
Yeah. Which
is like going back to high school English.
Yeah. Well, I think I found a happy medium on that. I've always gone by the seat of my pants as well until I wrote one book where I was consulting with an architect, and she kept saying, what about this? What about this? Is your character going to do this? Is your character going to do that? And she threw me because she was plotting my book for me before I knew what was going to go on. And so for a little bit of time, that was frustrating to me because I like the discovery phase too. As I'm writing, I like to discover what my characters discover as they discover it. So it was a little bit more of a trial to write that book because I knew it was going to happen. But there's benefits on both sides of the fence for that too.
Sure. Yeah.
Sometimes I like to know where I'm going.
Well, I usually don't know where I'm going more than when I first started, and everybody said, well, here you get a storyboard and you've got 20 chapters, and I bought the foam core and I marked it off into blocks, and I got out sticky notes, and I could never go more than 3 chapters, and I don't know where it's going to go after that.
Yeah.
But your genre will have expectations. In a romance, you've got to have the meat.
Right.
Basically it's hero and heroine are living their own lives, and that's all they want to do is just be happy in their own life. And then they meet each other, and then something bad happens, and they have to fix it, and then they fall in love.
Right.
So, you have those points. Where are they going to meet? When are they going to feel attracted? When is that first kiss going to happen? Are they going to make it into bed? And you have those little signposts along the way. And in the mystery, when are we going to discover this? When are we going to have, is this guy going to do it? Are we going to then twist it so that he didn't really do it? How are we going to do that? And in the end, they solve the crime.
Right. Right. I made an attempt at a Hallmark kind of romance. And for Hallmark, when I was actually writing to market, they have certain plot points that you have to cover. And I found that extremely difficult because it's like, okay, you have to have this, you have to have this, you have to have this. And so as I'm going along, I said, okay, I need to stick this in here. And you know what? I didn't like that because it didn't feel organic to me. I think the story came out fine, but having to write to a plot point, I found very difficult.
Yeah, no, I really can't do that. And I fix as I go. So I write a scene and I print it out and I read it in bed and I mark it up. And then I come back the next day. And that spurs you on to, where's it going to go from here and how's it going to go?
Yeah.
So it's semi-edited before I get to the end.
Yeah.
It still needs a lot of work, but and then I have these critique partners who keep me in line.
Yep.
Yeah.
So, so is there anything that I haven't covered that you'd like to talk about?
I don't think so. If your podcast, you ask the questions you want covered, and I'm happy to answer them. It's just writing is fun. Talking about it is fun too.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. So
So I know your next novel is called Trusting Uncertainty, and it's coming out at the end of July, July 27th. Is that right?
yes, unless I decide I'm too impatient and do it, but I've already moved it into July. It was going to be August, and I said no. It went together, and my editor didn't have as much trouble with it, so it's basically done. The proof is supposed to be here today as soon as the UPS man shows up, and I will then give it that final read, and it will be a book, and it reads totally different when it's in a book than any other medium.
Right.
And so then I'll get it ready and get it out.
Okay, this is number what in the Blackthorn series? Number 10?
10.
Okay.
Yeah. Now that does not count the 2 box sets. I've got 1, 2, and 3 are in a set, and 4, 5, and 6 are in a set, and those are, I don't count those because those are still books 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Right.
So it's the 10th book.
Okay. So I will encourage everybody to buy your book. And you can find out more at terryodell.com. And Terry, thanks for joining me today.
Oh, you're very welcome. My pleasure.